She was not a bride. She was a debt, paid in full. The man who had arranged the passage, a stern cousin with ink-stained fingers, had called her a solution to two problems. His of being burdened with a spinster cousin whose womb was a barren field, and the other man's, a stranger on the far frontier who simply needed a wife. Any wife. The word had hung in the air, heavy and plain. Any. She had traveled for 2 months, the rumble of the wagon wheels a constant reminder of her own worthlessness. She was a sealed letter, a parcel of unwanted goods being sent where she might, at last, find some meager use. Her name was Ilara, but for the duration of the journey, she was simply the bride from the East. She had practiced the man's name in her mind. Silas. It sounded strong, like river stone. She imagined him to be as hard and unyielding as the land he worked. When the wagon finally creaked to a halt before a simple log cabin, the dust settling like a final judgment, she saw him. He was tall and broad, his face weathered by sun and worry, making him look older than the 30 years her cousin had mentioned. He was exactly as she'd imagined. But the 3 figures standing slightly behind him were not. They were children. 3 of them, lined up like solemn little fence posts. The tallest, a boy of about 12, had his arms crossed, his gaze a hostile flint. A smaller boy stood beside him, half hidden, his eyes wide and fearful. And a little girl, no older than 5, clutched a fold of the man's trousers, her face a pale, tear-streaked oval. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The driver cleared his throat, eager to be away. Silas stepped forward, his boots crunching in the dirt. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like stones grinding together. My wife, Martha, she passed from fever last winter. He gestured with a slight nod toward the silent trio. These are my children. Caleb, Jonah, and Lily. Ilara felt the air leave her lungs. It was a single, sharp blow. A barren field. Her father's words echoed in the desolate quiet of her mind. She had been sent to this man to give him sons, to fill his house with life. That was her one, singular purpose, a purpose she already knew she could not fulfill. And here, life already existed. Life that was not hers, born of a woman who was gone, a woman who had already given this man everything Ilara could not. She was not just a replacement. She was a failure before she had even begun. She looked from Silas's grim face to the children's. She saw grief. She saw anger. She saw a tiny, bottomless well of loss in the little girl's eyes. This was not a home waiting to be built. This was a ruin. And she had been sent to haunt it. Silas seemed to read the shock on her face, but his expression didn't soften. It was not a plea, but a statement of fact. They need a mother. His words were not an invitation, they were a sentence. Ilara's own barrenness felt like a cruel joke, a cosmic taunt. They need a mother, and they sent him me. She looked at the children again, at their small, fierce faces, and a feeling she hadn't anticipated pierced through the layers of her shame. It was not pity. It was a strange, aching kinship. They were motherless. And in a way, she felt childless. 2 halves of a broken whole. She slowly, deliberately, stepped down from the wagon, her worn boots sinking into the soft dust. Her body ached, her heart was a leaden weight, but she straightened her shoulders. She walked past Silas, her gaze fixed on the 3 children. She stopped a few feet from them, sinking to her knees so she was at their level. The dirt stained her plain travel dress, but she didn't care. She looked at each of them, at Caleb's defiance, Jonah's fear, and Lily's profound sorrow. She held out her empty hands, palms up. Her voice was quiet, fragile, yet it carried in the vast silence. I cannot replace your mother, she said, her words aimed only at them. I wouldn't dare to try. But I am here now. A tear she hadn't realized was forming slipped down her cheek. My name is Ilara. If you'll let me, she whispered, her voice cracking, you can call me Mama. Caleb flinched as if she had struck him. He grabbed his siblings' hands and pulled them back toward the cabin, a silent, stark rejection. Silas watched, his face unreadable. Ilara remained kneeling in the dust, the setting sun casting a long, lonely shadow behind her. She had arrived. And she was utterly, completely alone. The first week was a war of silence. Ilara moved through the small cabin like a ghost, terrified of disturbing the dust of a life that wasn't hers. Martha's presence was everywhere. It was in the neat stack of mending by the hearth, the faint scent of lavender in the linen press, the way the single rocking chair was angled perfectly to catch the morning light. The children were her sentinels, their eyes following her every move. Caleb's were filled with open contempt. He spoke only to his father, and if Ilara passed him a piece of bread at the table, he would take it without a word, without a glance. Jonah was more elusive, a shadow who would disappear for hours, only to be found staring out at the unforgiving prairie from the barn loft. It was little Lily who was the most heart-wrenching. She would not speak at all. She carried a small, worn rag doll everywhere, a relic of her mother, and would sometimes stand in the middle of the room, her thumb in her mouth, her gaze fixed on some point in space only she could see, lost in a world Ilara could not enter. Ilara tried to make herself useful. She cooked, but her bread was heavier than Martha's had been, a fact Caleb made clear by pushing his crusts to the side of his plate. She tried to clean, but she put the tin plates on the wrong shelf, earning a sharp, corrective gesture from Caleb who moved them back to their proper place. Each small failure was a fresh wound. She felt like an imposter, an actress in a play for which she knew none of the lines. Silas was a quiet, constant presence. He would leave before dawn and return after dusk, his body weary from the endless work of the farm. He never criticized her. He never complimented her. He simply ate what she put before him, his gaze distant. He fixed the loose floorboard she tripped on without being asked. He sharpened the dull kitchen knife she struggled with. His kindness was entirely practical, devoid of warmth, and in some ways, that made it harder. It was the kindness one would show to a new piece of farm equipment, not a wife. One evening, after a particularly difficult day where Lily had cried inconsolably for an hour, Ilara saw Silas sitting on the porch steps, a block of pine and a small knife in his hands. His large, calloused fingers worked with a surprising gentleness, shaving away thin curls of wood. He was carving something. She watched from the shadows of the doorway as the shape of a small bird began to emerge from the wood. The next morning, the little carving was sitting beside Lily's bowl at the breakfast table. Lily stared at it, her crying from the night before forgotten. She picked it up, her tiny fingers tracing the smooth lines of its wings. A flicker of something, a ghost of a smile, touched her lips. It was the first sign of light Ilara had seen in the child's face. She felt a pang of something sharp and painful in her chest. It was jealousy. He knew how to reach them. He was their father. She was just here. That night, unable to sleep, she noticed a tear in Jonah's only good shirt, hanging from a peg on the wall. It was a small rip near the cuff, but it looked forlorn. By the dim light of a single candle, she took out her small sewing kit, a meager part of her dowry. Her own mother had taught her to stitch, telling her it was a useful skill for a woman. Ilara had always hated it, the tiny, precise movements feeling like a metaphor for the constrained life she was meant to live. But tonight, it felt different. She chose her thread with care, matching the faded blue of the cloth. Her stitches were small and even, a neat line of patient care. She wasn't just mending a shirt, she was trying to mend a piece of this broken family, a piece of this broken life. It took her over an hour. When she was finished, the seam was nearly invisible. She hung the shirt back on its peg and retreated to her small, lonely cot. The next morning, she saw Jonah put the shirt on. He paused, his fingers brushing against the cuff. He looked at the seam, then his eyes darted across the room and met hers for a fraction of a second. He didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. But he didn't look away with his usual fear. He just held her gaze. For one brief, startling moment, he saw her. That night, when she went to her cot, she found a small, smooth, uncarved piece of pine sitting on her pillow. It was a block of wood, just like the one Silas had used for Lily's bird. It was not a gift. It was not a promise. But it was an offering. It was a beginning. The season turned, the brutal summer heat giving way to the crisp, golden breath of autumn. The rhythm of the days became familiar, a slow, quiet dance of chores and shared meals. The silence in the cabin remained, but its edges had softened. It was no longer the sharp, hostile silence of strangers, but the heavy, comfortable quiet of people learning to share the same space, the same air. Ilara had found her place not by trying to fill Martha's shoes, but by carving out her own small footprints. She learned that Caleb, for all his bluster, loved her apple turnovers, a recipe from her own grandmother. She'd leave one on the table for him after he finished his evening chores, and it would always be gone by morning. She discovered that Jonah loved stories, though he was too shy to ask for them. She started reciting old fables and folk tales while she kneaded bread or churned butter, her voice a low, steady murmur. She would catch him lingering near the kitchen, his head cocked, listening. And Lily, sweet, silent Lily, had started to follow her. As Ilara would weed the small vegetable garden, Lily would be there, digging in the dirt beside her with a spoon. When Ilara would hang the laundry, Lily would hand her the clothespins. No words passed between them, but a bond was being woven, thread by silent thread. One afternoon, a cold wind swept down from the plains, carrying the first real bite of winter. That night, Jonah woke with a cough, a dry, rattling sound that shook his small frame. By morning, he was burning with fever. Silas was out on the range, checking the fences before the first snow, and wouldn't be back for 2 days. Panic seized Ilara. It was the same kind of fever, the doctor had said, that had taken Martha. Caleb stood by the bed, his face pale with a fear he was trying to hide behind a mask of adolescent anger. "You don't know what to do," he accused, his voice trembling slightly. She knew what to do. Ilara met his gaze, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach, but she did not flinch. "No, I don't," she said, her voice steady. "But I will not leave his side," and she didn't. For 2 days and 2 nights, she was a fixture in the chair beside Jonah's bed. She bathed his forehead with cool water, spooned weak broth between his cracked lips, and held his hand when the fever dreams made him cry out. She spoke to him in a low, constant whisper, telling him stories, humming tuneless songs, promising him that morning would come. Caleb watched her, his hostility slowly dissolving into a grudging respect. He brought her water without being asked. He kept the fire stoked. He even coaxed Lily into eating a little, keeping her out from underfoot. On the morning of the 3rd day, the fever broke. Jonah opened his eyes, his gaze clear for the first time in days. He looked at Ilara, asleep in the chair, her head slumped at an awkward angle, her face drawn with exhaustion. He reached out a weak hand and touched her arm. Ilara's eyes fluttered open. She saw him looking at her, truly looking, and a small, weak smile touched his lips. "Your stories are better than Mama's were," he whispered, his voice raspy. She always forgot the endings. It was the cruelest, kindest thing he could have said. It acknowledged the ghost between them and, in the same breath, allowed Ilara to be her own person. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of relief and a profound, aching gratitude. When Silas returned that evening, he found the cabin quiet. He walked in to see Jonah sitting up in bed, looking pale but peaceful, while Ilara read to him from a worn book. Lily was curled at the foot of the bed, asleep, and Caleb was quietly whittling a piece of wood at the table, a skill his father had clearly taught him. Silas stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. His gaze met Ilara's over the top of the book. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. For the first time, she saw the harsh lines of worry around his eyes soften. He saw a home. Not a ruin, not a house of ghosts, but a home. That night, after the children were asleep, Ilara found him on the porch, working on the small block of wood he had given her. He was carving. He glanced up as she approached, then looked back down at his work. "The boy is strong," he said. It was more than she'd ever heard him say at once. "He has a good mother," he added, his eyes never leaving the wood in his hands. Ilara's heart stopped. He hadn't said a new mother, he hadn't said a mother again, he had simply said, a good mother. She stood beside him, watching the blade shave away the pine, a feeling of peace settling over her, as soft and quiet as the coming snow. Winter settled over the prairie, blanketing the world in a pristine, unforgiving white. Inside the small cabin, however, a tentative warmth had taken root. The silences were now filled with the small sounds of a family, the scratch of Caleb's pencil as he did his lessons, the murmur of Ilara's voice as she told a story, the soft thud of Lily's doll falling to the floor. The change was so gradual Ilara hardly noticed it until the day Lily finally spoke to her. Ilara was kneading dough, her hands covered in flour, when the little girl tugged on her skirt. "More," Lily said, her voice a tiny, rusty thing from disuse, as she pointed to the scrap of dough Ilara had given her to play with. Ilara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked down at the child, whose eyes were fixed on hers, open and trusting. Ilara smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. She tore off another piece of dough and handed it to the girl. "Of course, sweet girl. As much as you want." From that day on, Lily's words came like a slow spring thaw, a trickle at first, then a steady stream. The greatest shift, however, was in Silas. The space between them, once a vast and empty canyon, had begun to close. He would speak to her of the farm, of his plans for the spring planting. He would tell her about a hawk he'd seen, or the way the ice formed on the creek. They were small things, but they were offerings, pieces of his world he was laying at her feet. He started carving her bird from the block of pine in the evenings, and she would watch as the intricate feathers and delicate head took shape under his masterful hands. The bird was becoming beautiful, a perfect, wild thing, and she knew, with a certainty that made her breath catch, that he was carving a likeness of her soul as he saw it. The world they had built was a fragile one, a bubble of peace in a harsh landscape, and it was about to be shattered. One afternoon, a handsome carriage, entirely out of place in their rugged world, pulled up to the cabin. A woman emerged, dressed in a fine wool coat and a hat adorned with a peacock feather. She was tall and severe, her face a mask of pinched propriety. Silas stiffened beside Ilara on the porch. "Beatrice," he said, his voice flat and cold. Martha's sister Beatrice's gaze swept over the humble cabin with disdain before landing on Ilara. Her eyes narrowed, taking in Ilara's simple dress and flour-dusted apron. This was the face of the world Ilara had left behind, a world of judgment and whispered condemnations. "Silas," Beatrice said, her voice sharp and brittle. "I came as soon as I heard. It took months for the news to reach me. That you had remarried." She said the word as if it were an obscenity. And to her eyes raked over Ilara once more, a dismissal in a single glance. "I have come for the children. They will not be raised by a barren stranger. They are my blood. They belong with me, in a civilized home." The word barren struck Ilara with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. It was the old shame, the old curse, spoken aloud in her new home. The children, drawn by the strange carriage, had gathered in the doorway behind her. She could feel their fear, their confusion. Silas stepped forward. "They are my children, Beatrice. And this is their home, this is a hovel," she snapped. "And she pointed a gloved finger at Ilara, "can never be their mother. A mother's love comes from her own body, from her own blood. What can a dried-up, empty vessel like you possibly know of that love? You are a convenience, a farmhand in a dress. You will be cast aside as soon as a proper woman, a fertile woman, comes along." Every word was a poisoned dart, aimed to kill the fragile hope Ilara had nurtured. She felt herself shrinking, the old feelings of worthlessness washing over her. She was nothing. She was a fraud. She looked at Silas, expecting to see doubt in his eyes, but saw only a quiet, resolute anger. He looked at her, and in his gaze was a strength that he seemed to be trying to pour directly into her. He did not speak for her. He was waiting for her to speak for herself. She turned away from Beatrice, away from the venom and judgment. She looked at the 3 children huddled in the doorway. Caleb's face was a storm of anger and confusion. Jonah was pale, his eyes wide with fear. And little Lily was clutching the wooden bird Silas had carved for her, holding it like a talisman. Ilara's voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear and resonant, forged in the fire of months of silent devotion. "You are wrong," she said, her gaze locked on the children. A mother is not the one who gives you life. She took a step towards them, her heart exposed. It's the one who teaches you how to live it. She looked at Caleb. A mother is the one who patches your shirt and knows you like extra cinnamon in your turnover. She looked at Jonah. She's the one who holds your hand in the dark and finishes the story so you know the hero makes it home. Her eyes fell on Lily, and her voice softened to a whisper. A mother is the one who is there. The one who stays. She stopped, her chest aching. She had said her piece. The choice was not hers. It was theirs. Silence descended. Beatrice watched, a smug, triumphant smile on her face. Then, Caleb moved. He walked slowly, deliberately, out of the doorway. He crossed the space between them and, in front of his aunt, in front of his father, he took Ilara's hand. His grip was firm, unwavering. A moment later, Jonah followed, taking her other hand. Finally, little Lily ran forward and wrapped her arms around Ilara's legs, burying her face in her skirt. She looked up, her eyes shining. "My mama stays," she said, her voice full of a child's simple, profound certainty. Beatrice stared, her face ashen. She had been defeated, not by arguments or anger, but by a truth so simple it was unbreakable. Ilara stood there, anchored by the 3 children, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She was not a barren field. She was a harbor. And her ships had come in. The winter snows melted, and the prairie bloomed with a fierce, wild beauty. The carriage with the peacock feather never returned. Beatrice had vanished back into the world of rigid rules and cold propriety, leaving behind a silence that was, for the first time, truly peaceful. The cabin was no longer a house of ghosts, it was a home, filled with the warmth of a family forged not by blood, but by choice. Ilara's days were a tapestry woven with purpose. She moved with a confidence she had never known, her steps sure, her hands capable. She was no longer an imposter. The title of a mother fit her as comfortably as her own skin. Caleb had become her steadfast helper, his youthful cynicism replaced by a quiet, protective loyalty. He would talk to her for hours about the animals and the land, sharing the world he loved. Jonah, her quiet listener, now read stories to her while she worked, his voice growing stronger and more confident with every page. And Lily was her little shadow, a constant, cheerful presence, her chatter filling the rooms like music. The love between them was a living thing, a sturdy plant that had pushed its way through frozen ground to reach for the sun. Her relationship with Silas had blossomed in the quiet light of this new life. Their conversations were still sparse, but their shared glances were full of meaning. A touch of his hand on her arm as he passed was more eloquent than a sonnet. He saw her, not as a solution or a replacement, but as the woman who had brought his family, and his heart, back from the brink. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and rose, Silas sat on the porch, putting the finishing touches on his carving. He had worked on it patiently for months, in stolen moments at the end of long days. He beckoned Ilara over. He placed the finished carving in her hands. It was the songbird, so exquisitely detailed she could almost feel the flutter of its wings. Every feather was perfect, its head was cocked as if listening, its tiny beak slightly open, as if about to sing. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "A songbird," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You brought the song back to this house." Ilara, his use of her name, so rare and deliberate, was a gift in itself. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He saw her. He had always seen her, not the barren woman her past had labeled her, but the vibrant, strong soul he had captured in wood. He saw her strength, her resilience, her unwavering love. He loved her because of who she was, not in spite of what she couldn't be. As she stood there, clutching the perfect, silent bird, the screen door creaked open. Lily padded out onto the porch, her face soft with sleep. She walked straight to Ilara and wrapped her arms around her waist, leaning her head against her. "Good night, Mama," she whispered into the folds of Ilara's dress. "Mama." The word landed in Ilara's heart, not with the shock of that first day, but with the gentle, profound peace of a final destination. She ran a hand over Lily's hair, her gaze meeting Silas's over the top of the child's head. He was smiling. A true, open smile that transformed his weathered face. She had been sent away because of what she could not give. But here, on this rugged patch of earth, surrounded by a quiet man and 3 grieving children, she had found everything she had ever wanted. She had been given a family, a purpose, a home. And she had learned that a mother's love is not grown in the body. It is grown in the heart, and hers was, at long last, full to bursting. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Timeless Tales. If you had seen her there, kneeling in the dust on that first day, would you have believed in the mother she could become? Tell us in the comments.